Imagine opening a box in the middle of a blazing summer afternoon and pulling out vegetables that are still crisp, milk that is still cool, and fruit that tastes like it was picked that morning. No electricity, no compressor, no monthly bill, and no refrigerator. It sounds impossible today, but for thousands of years, people kept food fresh long before power lines ever crossed the countryside. In fact, some Amish communities still use a version of a cooling method so simple that most people walk past the materials every day without realizing what they're capable of. The strange part is that the entire system can be built for less than $8. And once you understand how it works, you'll start wondering whether modern technology solved a problem that was already solved centuries ago. Because hidden behind this simple clay box is a scientific principle so effective that researchers still study it today. And yet most people have never heard of it. To understand why this method matters, you first have to understand a problem that affects nearly every home in America. Modern refrigerators are incredible machines, but they're also one of the biggest energy users in the average household. They run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year after year. Most people don't even think about them because they're always there, quietly humming in the background. But every time the compressor starts, it consumes electricity. Every time warm air enters when the door opens, the system works harder. And if the power goes out, the countdown begins. Within hours, food can start becoming unsafe. That's why generations before electricity were forced to develop different solutions. Solutions based not on machinery, but on physics. One of the most fascinating was a cooling method built almost entirely from clay. At first glance, it looks absurdly simple. Just one clay container placed inside another. Nothing special. No wires. No motors. No batteries. Yet this humble design can lower temperatures dramatically under the right conditions. The secret lies in something happening all around us every second. Evaporation. When water changes from liquid into vapor, it requires energy. That energy has to come from somewhere. And in this case, it comes from heat. As water evaporates, it pulls heat away from nearby surfaces. The result is cooling. It's the same reason sweat cools your skin on a hot day. The same reason a wet towel feels cold. And the same reason ancient civilizations used porous clay vessels to keep water cool thousands of years ago. The clay box takes that principle and turns it into a food storage system. Here's how it works. A smaller clay container sits inside a larger clay container. The gap between them is filled with wet sand. The sand absorbs water like a sponge. The porous clay allows tiny amounts of moisture to slowly migrate outward. As that moisture evaporates into the surrounding air, heat is pulled away from the inner container. That inner space becomes significantly cooler than the outside environment. No electricity required. Just water, clay, and airflow. The science sounds simple because it is simple. Yet the results surprised even modern researchers. Various studies conducted in hot, dry climates have shown that evaporative cooling systems can dramatically extend the freshness of fruits and vegetables. Produce that normally spoils in a few days can remain usable much longer. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, leafy greens. Many foods benefit from reduced temperatures and increased humidity. In some cases, shelf life can increase several times over. That's not magic. That's physics. But if the principle works so well, why doesn't everyone use it? The answer reveals something interesting about how technology changes society. When electric refrigeration became widespread during the 20th century, it transformed food storage. Families could keep larger quantities of food. Stores could transport perishables across long distances. Entire industries grew around refrigerated supply chains. The refrigerator became a symbol of progress. And once a technology becomes dominant, older methods often disappear from public awareness. Not because they stopped working, but because people stopped teaching them. Skills that were once common knowledge slowly faded away. The clay cooling box became one of those forgotten solutions. In many rural communities around the world, however, the idea never vanished completely. People continued using variations of evaporative cooling because it remained practical, reliable, affordable, and independent from electrical infrastructure. That's one reason the concept still attracts interest from off-grid communities today. People who value resilience often look for backup systems, not because they want to abandon modern conveniences, but because they understand that redundancy matters. If a storm knocks out power, if a natural disaster disrupts supply chains, if utility costs continue rising, simple systems suddenly become very attractive. And few systems are simpler than a clay box cooled by evaporation. There's another reason this method fascinates people. It challenges an assumption many of us hold without realizing it. We've been taught that effective cooling requires advanced machinery, compressors, refrigerants, electronics. Yet nature performs cooling all the time using nothing more than water and airflow. Ancient builders understood this. Traditional architecture across hot regions often incorporated cooling strategies based on evaporation. Courtyards, fountains, wind catchers, porous materials, all designed to work with natural processes rather than fight against them. The clay box is simply one small example of that larger philosophy. Work with physics, not against it. Now, before anyone rushes out and throws away their refrigerator, it's important to understand the limitations. This system is not a replacement for modern refrigeration in every situation. It does not keep food at refrigerator temperatures. It does not safely store all perishables. It works best in hot, dry environments where evaporation occurs efficiently. Humid climates reduce performance because the air already contains substantial moisture. When evaporation slows, cooling decreases. That's one reason understanding the science matters. The method works because of specific conditions, not because of magic. Still, even with those limitations, the cooling effect can be remarkable. Imagine a summer afternoon where outdoor temperatures feel oppressive. Now imagine reaching into a container that's noticeably cooler than the surrounding air. That's the experience that has amazed people for generations. And it all comes from principles taught in basic science classes. Sometimes the most effective ideas are hiding in plain sight. The construction process itself is surprisingly straightforward. 2 unglazed clay pots, one slightly smaller than the other. Clean sand, water, a cloth cover. The smaller pot sits inside the larger one. Sand fills the space between them. Water saturates the sand. A damp cloth covers the opening. As evaporation occurs through the clay and cloth, cooling begins. Fresh water is added periodically to maintain performance. The process sounds almost too simple to be useful. Yet simplicity is often the hallmark of durable design. The fewer moving parts something has, the fewer things can fail. No compressor can break. No circuit board can malfunction. No refrigerant can leak. Nature does the work. Humans simply provide the materials. That idea resonates deeply with many traditional communities, including some Amish households. The Amish are often portrayed as rejecting technology entirely. The reality is more nuanced. Most Amish communities evaluate technologies based on how those technologies affect family, community, and self-sufficiency. As a result, practical low-tech solutions remain highly valued. If a simple method accomplishes a task effectively, there's often little reason to replace it with something more complex. That mindset has preserved many techniques modern society has forgotten. Not because they're secret, not because they're illegal, but because they're no longer fashionable. The clay cooling box falls into that category. An old solution waiting quietly in the background. There's also an environmental angle worth considering. Modern refrigeration relies on manufacturing, transportation, electricity generation, and maintenance. Again, none of this means refrigerators are bad. They provide enormous benefits. But simple cooling systems offer an alternative for specific situations. Garden harvests, emergency preparedness, off-grid cabins, remote locations, outdoor events, humanitarian projects. In regions where electricity remains unreliable, low-cost evaporative cooling can make a meaningful difference. Researchers and aid organizations have explored these concepts for decades because reducing food spoilage directly improves food security. When food lasts longer, less food is wasted. When less food is wasted, families save resources. It's a surprisingly powerful chain reaction. A simple clay container can influence outcomes far beyond the container itself. Perhaps that's what makes forgotten technologies so fascinating. They're reminders that intelligence doesn't always look modern. Sometimes wisdom arrives in the form of a smartphone. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a clay pot. The challenge is recognizing value regardless of appearance. Modern society often equates complexity with superiority. More features, more electronics, more automation. Yet history repeatedly shows that elegant solutions are often simple. The wheel, the lever, the pulley, basic ideas that changed civilization. The clay cooling box belongs to that tradition. A straightforward application of natural law. No mystery required, just observation, experimentation, and generations of practical experience. Imagine the first person who noticed water stored in a clay vessel remained cooler than expected. Imagine generations refining that observation, testing materials, improving designs, passing knowledge from parent to child. Long before engineering textbooks existed, that's how many innovations began. Not in laboratories, but in everyday life. People solving real problems with available resources. The result was technology in its purest form. Knowledge applied to improve survival. And perhaps that's why these stories continue capturing attention today. People are tired of hearing that every solution requires expensive equipment. Sometimes a useful idea costs very little. Sometimes it has existed for centuries. Sometimes it survives quietly in communities that value practicality over trends. The clay cooling box checks every one of those boxes. And whether you ever build one or not, understanding it changes how you see the world. You begin noticing hidden systems everywhere. Natural processes doing extraordinary things. Wind cooling buildings. Trees lowering temperatures. Water storing energy. Materials performing functions most people overlook. Suddenly the world feels less dependent on machines and more connected to fundamental principles. That's a powerful shift. Because once you understand the principles, you can apply them in countless ways. The clay box becomes more than a container. It becomes a lesson. A reminder that innovation isn't always about creating something new. Sometimes it's about rediscovering something old. Something useful. Something forgotten. The next time you hear a refrigerator humming in the background, think about that for a moment. Think about a simple clay box sitting quietly in the shade. No electricity, no noise, no monthly bill, just water, and physics doing exactly what physics has always done. For generations, people trusted those forces to protect their food. Many still do, and perhaps the most surprising part of all is that the science was never hidden. The knowledge was never truly lost. It was simply overshadowed, waiting for curious people to rediscover it. If you enjoyed uncovering forgotten solutions like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week we explore practical old-world knowledge, overlooked technologies, and surprising systems that modern society almost forgot. And who knows, the next forgotten secret might be sitting right in your own backyard.